the U.S. government is running out of excuses. As more and more documents become declassified, officials can no longer blame every major UFO sighting on comets, clouds, and weather balloons. Does this mean the government will finally begin telling us everything it knows about UFOs? Socorro, New Mexico is the kind of small town people are usually traveling through on their way to someplace else. Visitors rarely slow down long enough to learn that this place has a mysterious past, and that one retired Socorro police officer is still haunted by the unearthly encounter that took place here 32 years ago. Lonnie Zamora remembers April 24th, 1964. He was a rookie on the force, returning to the station after an uneventful day. Then, a speeding vehicle passed Zamora's patrol car, and he set off in pursuit.
When we got to this hill, I saw a lot of dust, and I let the speeder go, and I turned to investigate. I could see a white object sitting between those two bushes over there, and I had to come real slow because this was a messed up road, had big rocks on it and everything. I thought it was the kids from the high school. They were racing up here, and maybe one of the teenagers had turned over.
When the speeding object came to a stop, Zamora claims that he saw two figures in white coveralls emerge from a strange white UFO. He moved in slowly.
I came up here, this road, till I could find a flat spot where I could park my car. I got out the car and glanced down to the arroyo there, and I saw this white-looking object. It was sort of a big egg shape, bigger than a car. Those are the exact bushes that were there, and the craft was sitting right in between them two. So I started down to see what it was, and then I heard this big boom in the bottom, and fire came off the bottom. So I started running behind my police car to take cover. I could feel the heat off that because it was windy like now, and then it gradually pulled up about 20, 30 feet and stayed there for a while, and then just took off.
His radio was dead. Zamora could only watch in awe as the object disappeared over the horizon. As soon as it was gone, the police radio crackled to life, and Zamora called for backup. A New Mexico State Police unit quickly arrived.
We came down here, and we saw this big rock right down here. It was still on fire. And then we saw the imprints of the legs of the craft, and it was 4 of them. And then we saw this footprints around here.
By nightfall, the FBI had arrived on scene and began gathering evidence.
They went down there and measured the footprints and everything. And we stayed out here till about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, still wondering what it was. But they didn't say what it was or not. About 9 o'clock, they said we went down to the courthouse, and we talked about it until about midnight.
Instantly, Socorro was the center of an unprecedented media frenzy.
This is one of the few sightings that got national attention immediately. Lonnie Zamora's story is on the national news. It's in all the newspapers. Everybody's talking about it.
Kevin Randall is an internationally renowned UFO investigator. He feels the Socorro events stand alone because of the amount of physical evidence collected at the scene.
Landing gear marks were found. The bush was burned by the UFO engine. There were occupants, creatures from the craft sighted by Lonnie Zamora.
And the event brought the greatest UFO researcher of the day to Socorro.
J. Allen Hynek, the Air Force consultant, came to Socorro. He looked at it, talked to Zamora, talked to Zamora's superiors, talked to people who saw the landing traces, took photographs. So there's physical evidence remaining behind. It's one of the few times they said there could be a flying saucer.
I had conversations with Dr. Hynek about the Socorro case, and his comments to me led me to believe that he felt that this was one of those cases where the government was unwilling to permit him to say what he would like to say about it, and that dismayed him a great deal.
According to Timmerman, a longtime associate of J. Allen Hynek, the Socorro event was one of the defining moments in Hynek's career.
He felt that this was one of the most important cases he'd come across. And I think that maybe his attitude toward it was developed as a result of his feel about the Lonnie Zamora, the primary witness.
Lonnie Zamora is very credible. He's a police officer. He has nothing to gain by telling this story. He is stuck with this story from the very beginning. This is what he saw. There's no question that Lonnie Zamora saw something unusual on the ground.
According to the Air Force and government, they say they don't know what it was, and they never told me not to say or say about it, you know, talk about it, but they say that they don't know what it was.
In fact, it took 21 years for the Air Force to finally offer an explanation for the Socorro UFO landing. They offered logs from the White Sands Missile Base, charting government testing of the newly developed lunar landing module. But the logs indicate the tests ended more than 5 hours before Zamora's sighting.
The Air Force explanation simply doesn't work because they have no documentation to place the lunar lander in that portion of New Mexico at that time. It does not match Zamora's description.
I think if Dr. Hynek were here today and saw this new documentation available, the report that the Air Force says it was a lunar lander, if anything, that landed near Socorro, I think he'd say bourgeois. He'd say that this is the government trying to do its fancy little dance and saying things that will satisfy the media, who will satisfy the country and the world, that there's no reality to the UFO phenomenon, whereas there is.
And according to JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, the lunar lander alluded to in the government data did not fly. It was dropped from a tower and had no system of independent propulsion as reported by Zamora. Randall believes that this is proof the Socorro UFO was not a lunar lander.
The Air Force completed their UFO investigation, said they had nothing more to say on it, and yet now they're coming out this year providing us with new explanations for old sightings. I have no idea why they're doing it, but I find it highly significant.
Randall believes it is Socorro's proximity to several highly sensitive military bases that have prompted a continuing disinformation campaign.
It is between the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the White Sands Missile Range. The Very Large Array radio telescope is 50 or 60 miles to the west. Socorro's right in the middle of this. If you've got a race of intelligent beings wanting to see what we're doing, this makes a perfect place for them to come to observe our steps into space and what our science is doing.
According to Timmerman, the Socorro event convinced Dr. Hynek that the truth about UFOs was being manipulated by the Air Force. After Socorro, Hynek left his post. The government lost one of its most prestigious spokespersons and gained its most ardent critic.
Dr. Hynek saw this and it was very obvious to him that what Lonnie Zamora was saying in the depths of his honesty was not what the military was saying in their attempt to explain it.
Disproving the lunar lander theory does not mean that the Socorro craft came from another planet, but it does raise serious questions about the true nature of the event. What could have landed there more than 30 years ago that is still too sensitive to reveal?